Val d'Orcia is part of the agricultural hinterland of Siena, colonized by the city in the 14th and 15th centuries and developed to reflect an idealized model of land management. The distinctive appearance of the landscape, flat chalk plains with conical hills rising above them, topped with clustered fortified settlements, was the inspiration for many artists. Montalcino, one of the small towns in the Val d'Orcia, is situated on a hill covered with olive groves and the famous Brunello vineyards, dominating the Asso, Ombrone and Arbia Valley. Surrounded by walls, the oldest part of Montalcino is located along the main street, Via Matteotti, which widens to form the Piazza del Popolo, the medieval centre of the town. At the point where Via Matteotti enters the piazza stands the Palazzo dei Priori, now the town hall, built in the 13th and 14th centuries. The Centro Storico is the historical centre of Montalcino and one of the most interesting places to visit in the town. Like most places in Italy, the historical centre is a maze of narrow streets and alleys that lead to rows of old houses stacked against one another, old villas and mansions and small shops. Montalcino is divided, like most medieval Tuscan towns, into quarters called contradi. There are also quite a lot of ancient churches, chapels and a few monuments to visit. During its more than 2 millennium of recorded history, the town has experienced much turmoil and strife. The 10th century saw the area invaded by Saracen warriors, and between the 12th and 16th centuries there was constant war and political upheaval. The fortress is an outstanding example of military architecture, built on a pentagonal plan to a design by Mino Foresi and Domenico Di Feo. The fortress incorporates some of the pre-existing southern walls, the pre-existing structures including the keep of Santo Martino, the San Giovanni Tower, and an ancient basilica which now serves as the fortress chapel. The landscape is a network of farms, villages and towns, reflecting the prosperity of the farmland, the mercantile wealth of Siena and the need for defence. The working landscape of fields, farms, trees and forests is interspersed with low, almost conical hills, many with settlements clustering around their summits, decorated with statuesque cypress trees. The landscape was largely rewritten in the 14th and early 15th centuries, when it was colonized by Siena at the height of its power as a city-state. San Quirico is located at the northern end of Val d'Orcia, at a strategic location on the Via Francigena and Via Cassia. The town is surrounded by ancient fortified walls. The distinctive landscape of the Val d'Orcia, flat chalk plains interspersed by almost conical hills with fortified towns, inspired many Sienese artists, and their paintings have come to exemplify the beauty of well-managed Renaissance agricultural landscapes, where the inhabitants are depicted as living in harmony with nature. The Horti Leonini, laid out by Diomede Leoni in 1580, is a superb example of the Italian garden. The enormous garden opens into a wide perspective flight, the effect of which is helped by the perfectly geometrical beds of box hedge. Starting at the bottom of the garden, an English wood extends up through to the large square at the top, which was once dominated by the old Torre del Cassero, destroyed during the Second World War. A large part of the ancient town walls still stand along with 14 small towers, although some of them are incorporated into other buildings. The Church of St. Francis, which faces the main square, has undergone numerous changes over the centuries. La Collegiata di San Quirico was built on the site of the old parish church, which dated from the 8th 8th century. cypresses form a striking addition to the landscape, planted along routes and around settlements, their regular form punctuating the rounded shapes of the hills, and their dark colour contrasting dramatically with the pale landscape. The landscape was thus created to be efficient, functional, equitable, and aesthetically pleasing. It was based on innovative tenure systems, whereby the estates owned by merchants were divided into small properties and cultivated by families who lived on the land. Half of the produce was paid to the merchants as rent, sufficient to allow the merchants to reinvest in further agricultural improvements. The farms were mixed farms, cultivating grain, vines, olives, fruit and vegetables, and with hay meadows and pastures interspersed between the farms for livestock. Farmers practiced transhumance with routes to Maremma and Lamiata, an illustration of the aim for the farming landscape to create pleasing pictures is the persistent tradition of planting roses to embellish vineyards. The most dramatic example of a planned new town is Pienza, named after its founder, Pope Pius II, who in 1450 commissioned Bernardo Rossellino to enlarge his village to create an ideal city, with cathedral, palaces, and civic buildings surrounding a central piazza. The town hall is the last building in order of date constructed in the main square. It's characterized by a wide loggia supported by columns with a tower. The cathedral, following Pope Pius II's wish, was bound to be of preeminent importance with its visual impact. Built at the top of a hill dominating the Orcia Valley, Pienza is the most important example of an ideal Renaissance town. The best way to find sunflowers in Tuscany is to drive on small roads in the countryside in Val d'Orcia. It's hard not to fall in love with a field of sunflowers. They give you a sense of happiness, like sun shining on a beautiful summer day. The Val d'Orcia bears testimony from archaeological remains to prehistoric settlements, to an important role during the Etruscan period, and to further development during the Roman Empire. The area seems to have been largely abandoned agriculturally in the Middle Ages. Chianciano is surrounded by hills on all sides, which are dense with chestnut, ilex, beechwood and oak trees. The history of Chianciano can be traced back to the 5th century BC, at the time of the Etruscans. The Etruscans had first built a temple in the town close to the Silene Springs in Chianciano, which had been dedicated to the god of good health. The ability of the water of Chianciano to heal ailments had been well known even in Roman times. Horace had visited the area in the 1st century BC, as advised by his physician. Several large Roman villas had been built in Chianciano, close to the thermal springs. The town has been successful in preserving plenty of natural green areas in its public gardens, parks and villas. Montepulciano's economy is mainly based on agriculture and is known for its beautiful wines, including Il Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, which are considered to be the best in Italy by several wine connoisseurs. Montepulciano is mostly known for its medieval buildings and its natural beauty. The town is located at an altitude of 600 meters and is perched on top of a limestone ridge, quite close to Siena, Florence, Rome and Pienza. The landscape seems to have created a strong cultural identity, and people have chosen to remain on the land in this area, unlike other parts of Italy, where over the past 40 years there's been a gradual drift from the countryside. The landscape patterns have thus survived in the Val d'Orcia. The main square is surrounded by magnificent buildings created mostly by famous architects of the Renaissance. The Palazzo Comunale of Montepulciano was designed by Michelozzo. The Duomo, or the Cathedral of Santa Maria Assunta, is the most important religious place. The facade is unfinished and plain. Standing imperious on its high tufa ridge, Montepulciano seems to have been positioned by a landscape painter and laid out by a designer of Renaissance opera sets. It has one of the most intact and architecturally unified historic centres of any Italian town. Within its walls, apart from a few nips and tucks, no major building work has taken place since 1580. The Torre della Pulcinella, a 15th century tower, chuckles over its comical statue of Pulcinella, who strikes the hours with his stick. Sant'Agostino Church was built by Michelozzo, with an elaborate carved portal featuring the Virgin and Child. The present dimension of the town was reached at the end of the 13th century, when the third and last city wall was completed. During the 15th and 16th centuries, Montepulciano underwent a notable transformation, with the erection of numerous important Renaissance buildings that fitted into the urban medieval framework. A true masterpiece of Renaissance architecture, the San Biagio Temple is the work of da San Gallo il Vecchio. It was constructed and dedicated to the miraculous image of the Virgin Mary that had previously adorned the church here, and that today can still be seen as part of the main altar of the new church. It's a prime example of harmonious and solid construction on a Greek cross plan, with all the facades identical, except for the temple's principal facade, which is enriched by the presence of two bell towers, one of which is unfinished. The strategic importance and development of the Val d'Orcia area is intertwined with the Via Francigena, which has traversed the area since Roman times, linking Rome with the north of Italy and France.